These crazy alien sightings that we see, the flying saucers. Okay, hey, you've got the whole Word of God. It starts with in the beginning. Who made the angels? And it shows that when men get involved, you're going to deal with a book that's missing half of the story. How are 8 people going to take care of 8,000 animals? I think that Christians act like we have the whole story, when in reality, we are uncovering things every single day that show us, no, we don't actually have the whole story. I think it was our first episode. We spent a bunch of time talking about just kind of opening up some of the conversation of religion, and you mentioned maybe we need to have a segment that we talk about things we didn't question but should have, or something along those lines. So I've been on this interesting journey with religion in general, right? But one of the funny things is I was talking with a friend this week, and just I read the Bible every day. And when you just look at what's there, what I'm starting to understand is if you start from the standpoint of thinking that this is the inspired Word of God and everything in here is literally true, historically accurate, all of that stuff, you just don't question anything. You have no need to. Go back and read it again if you're starting to question some things. And start from the standpoint that nothing is true. This is just a made-up story, right? And see if it reveals itself to you to be true, to be absurd, whatever the case is. So I go through, I read every day, and the book of Genesis, you just don't have to get that far into it, where you just start to see some stuff. So I think about just the different stories I'm aware of in the Bible. There's a lot of like far-fetched stuff, but the level of absurdity, to me, never really gets higher than Noah's flood. When you just kind of take it as the text reads, that a 600-year-old man decided to build a boat with his 3 sons. I'm sorry, not even a boat. It's called an ark. Not a boat. They had the word for boat. They said ark. What's the other famous ark in the Bible? The Ark of the Covenant. What is an ark? It's a box. It's a box. So a 600-year-old man built a wooden box big enough to house a zoo, and then somehow all the animals came onto the boat with him and were saved this destruction. Have you gone back and looked at any of these stories and started to see some of the just things that stick out that are just like, oh, this doesn't make a lot of sense? Well, look, it starts with Noah's Ark for sure. We also grew up in a household that believed in a 6,000-year Earth. Yeah, 6,000 years ago, there was a big bang. God said, let there be, and bang, it happened. Yeah. Okay? That's the big bang that we were taught about. Couldn't go to public school because evolution was teaching about a big bang that wasn't including God. Yeah. So, yeah, I got a lot of questions. As I get older, and I start to delve into what I think is actually happening. And here's the biggest thing that I struggle with. If the Earth is only 6,000 years old, then why are we unearthing things that can be carbon dated in a way that cannot be refuted back more than 6,000 years? How do you explain Gobekli Tepe? 12,000 years old. Nobody argues about the age of that. Well, where was that at in the Bible? And so when I look at the Bible and read it from the standpoint that you're talking about, because I've long had these questions and I was still a daily reader, although I'm not anymore, it's like I think I'm missing the majority of the story, not half the story. I think I'm missing most of the story of human existence here on this planet. Now, I'm not saying that makes the Bible not true. There's a distinction there. It makes sense in my mind that the Bible can still be true, but that I'm only looking at 25% of the story of what actually happened here. You're going to need something with a lot of things here. You're going to need something really miraculous to make these stories work, right? Because the 6,000-year-old Earth is the starting point. And there's a lot of people, a lot of Christians who've been able to work away from the 6,000 years. But for those who don't know, there is a movement called Young Earth Creationism, YEC, which is basically they took the Bible and they read all the genealogies in the Bible and they understood so-and-so lived so many years, had a son, and then his son lived so many years, had a son, and they added all that up, and that's how they got these dates. So they're saying the earth is literally 6,000 years old, despite all the evidence against it. Now, I will say, there wasn't a lot of evidence to refute that until the last 100 years or so, when all these things started to emerge. Science finally reached a point to where you could no longer just make the claim that this is a historical book, you know? So,
That's right.
so it just, there's too many things that don't work. But I'll just give you a for instance, because if you think about the flood, the Bible says that the flood waters covered all the earth, which would mean that the water has to be at least 29,000 feet deep, right? Because the tallest mountain on earth is Mount Everest, 29,000 feet.
Fair enough.
That would cover the entire earth. Okay, great. So no one's going to survive that. Interesting. All right. So let's just work back from the historical context here, because there's a whole bunch of different ways you can look at this and say, this is a myth. This did not happen. But the historical context is probably the first one. The flood on the 6,000 year Earth model would have happened around 2500 BC. Okay? We can go back that far in quite a few histories, written histories from people groups around the world. We had Egypt, we had Samaria, we had the people in the Indus Valley, in I believe modern day Pakistan. China also has a people group with writing from that time period. It seems like nobody told them that they were not supposed to still exist in 2500 BC. We know who the pharaohs were. We know who their sons were. They seem to take power. They seem to still have a bunch of people living in the land. So it's like, we know this didn't happen because they wrote it down.
Yes.
They wrote down everything.
Here's what I would say. I think a global cataclysm did happen that not just Noah's Ark, but all of the ancient myths around the world talk about something like that happening at various times. I think that did happen. I think there's a lot of evidence today to support the fact that that cataclysm came at the end of the Ice Age that we now know was around 12,000 years ago.
Yeah.
So I would say, okay, the Bible never told us what the dates were. Can it still be a historical document? Yes, it's people that inferred from that document what the dates actually were. People who are fallible and people who were only dealing with maybe 25% of the story. Because we have this Bible. It's the 66 books ordained by God, written through men, but ordained by God. That's what we were told, right?
Okay.
Well, when you go back just a little bit and ask some questions and say, okay, well, when did God come up with the whole 66 book idea? It's like, oh, wait, so men decided there'd be 66 books?
Yeah.
See, it's easy to live in ignorance and put everything into faith and just say, hey, I don't know, but my faith fills in the gaps. Like, no, you just don't have any knowledge at all about what you say you believe.
Yeah.
Like, you're going on to this whole salvation thing and then just accepting the rest of it as it comes to you. Let's have a rational mind and have the discussion. Where did the Bible come from?
Yeah.
Who made a decision that these are the books and this is the order that they're going to get broken down into? Who decided what chapters were going to be there and what verses to number and how to break all that down?
Yeah.
Men made those decisions. And so I love the study of the books that were left out of the Bible that didn't make the cut because they were considered to be, shall we say, too spicy for the time.
Yeah.
There's the Book of Enoch. The Book of Enoch. The Book of Enoch. Now, the Book of Enoch also talks about Noah.
Yeah.
But it's not included in the Bible.
Yeah.
So when we have more information about Noah in a book of the Bible that was excluded, I'm interested to know what did they leave out and why did they leave that out?
Yeah. Yeah.
Hey guys, it's Rob. If you are enjoying the Identically Opposed podcast, especially our clips about religion, I would love for you to check out my newest podcast, Faith in Question, which you can find on YouTube. We'll leave the link for you to be able to follow right in the show notes. On this channel, we're going to be discussing everything about the Bible and my journey of faith, the things that are believable and the things in the Bible that are not believable. And we're asking all the questions to understand exactly what is true. So check it out, Faith in Question. The first episode is up this week. We would love to have you join along on this journey.
So, if you read the Book of Enoch, what you'll find is that when Noah was born, his eyes shone like lasers, to the point that his father, who was Lamech, went to his father and to the mother of Noah and said, "This is not my child. This is one of theirs," referring to the sons of God that had sex with the daughters of men, and then their offspring were these men of great renown, and there were giants in the land in those days. So that's coming from the Bible. Now, the Bible's telling us that happened. Again, one of those things that nobody questions. Angels and demons are having sex with humans. Like, how does that work?
Yeah.
Because if a human has sex with a bear, nothing happens.
Right.
So angels and demons can have sex with humans and something happens.
Well, you're made in,
which means
in
that
their image. Let us make
wait
men
a minute,
in our image.
they're made in our image. Now it all starts to make sense that this might be just another species that's out there.
I'll blow your mind on that one another time.
Okay, so my main point here is the fact that when Noah was born, according to the Book of Enoch, his father said, "Hey, that ain't my kid.
Yeah.
That's not my son. Okay, I need you to know that that's not my son." So his father then goes to Methuselah, who was the great saint of the time, and tells him, like, "Hey, I don't think that Noah is my son." And Methuselah said to him that Noah is the offspring of the gods who was sent here for this great cataclysm that was to come, and that he would end up being the father of all humanity after this. Now, this is biblical text that was excluded from the Bible. People don't know about this. Okay? They don't question what they see. And when I tell them that the Book of Enoch is there, you should go read it. There's a lot of interesting things in there. They go, but it's not part of the Bible. Like, God didn't ordain that book. It wasn't written the same way. It's like, run it back. It's all written by the same dudes, okay? The same people wrote these books, and we decided what fit the dialogue and what didn't actually fit the angle that we were trying to go. Because then when you go further and explain to people, hey, are you aware that in Turkey, there are entire cities underground that tens of thousands of people lived in? We can go look at it. We can see what they were doing. There was agriculture down there. They had animals down there. They were living their entire lives down there. There's interconnected cities that tens of thousands of people lived in, and they could travel from one city to the other, all underground. What's that about? Why would they do that? Hey, where's this at in the Bible? Because, like, shouldn't that have been included? Like, who did the work? When did it happen? If all that can be dated back to 10,000 years ago or more, we have to just admit the fact that we don't have the whole story. And when I tell people this information, they're flabbergasted by it. Wait, there's cities in Turkey underground? Like, I didn't know that. And I tell them, okay, I'm going to put you on some game here. Go watch Ancient Aliens. No, I'm sorry, not Ancient Aliens. Go watch Ancient Apocalypse, which is Ancient Aliens without the crazy in it. And go watch the second to last episode of season 1, The Fatal Winter. And look at Darren Kuyu, and you come to your own conclusions about whether or not you think human beings that were born in the last 4,000 years did that. Or if there was something going on and people lived underground. Oh, I don't know. Maybe because it's warm down in the ground and there was an ice age that was happening. Like, that'd be a reason to live underground. We know when this actually happened. And then when you come out of that, you see all these monuments like Gobekli Tepe that are there in the wilderness, in Turkey, in Syria, where people were coming out of this great darkness and building these monuments to that. So I still like to say this. I think that Christians act like we have the whole story, when in reality, we are uncovering things every single day that show us, no, we don't actually have the whole story. There's a lot being discovered, and maybe this whole, like, end of the Ice Age thing it makes a little bit of sense.
See,
that was the cataclysm, and if the ice caps are melting, that would cause a global flood, would it not?
Yeah, you're working too hard to try to make this work with the text. The text doesn't work. The first 3 words of the Bible are in the beginning, right? So if you're talking about an ice age that preceded the beginning, if you're talking about people that existed underground before the beginning, the text doesn't work, right? So we don't have to get any further than the 3rd word of the Bible to say, yeah, this is certainly not historically accurate. Okay, so like let's we can
just say that the Bible's missing pieces in the middle.
I don't see how it's possible because I have studied the Bible enough to see that or to understand if it is literal, it can't be missing pieces because we can play out the genealogies. We can go through the days of creation. Like if the earth is 6,000
but it
years
assumes
old,
that you have 66 books in chronological order that are not missing anything. So that's my point, is that it's not literal. I don't think the Bible's literal.
You're going to have a hard time getting people to look at the stuff that's not there. I agree with you. I love the Book of Enoch. I'm reading the Book of Jasher right now, which is fascinating. If you haven't heard of Jasher, the Bible actually mentions Jasher. Actually, when Joshua talks about the sun standing still in the sky, he says, oh, if you don't believe me, go read the Book of Jasher. It's written down right there. Why is that not in our Bible? We have a text. Well, the Bible I use actually does have Jasher in it. But anyway, that's a long story. We'll be able to come to that.
Does it have the Book of Enoch in it? Does it have the Apocalypse of Abraham in it?
There are a number of books in there that you've never heard of. But that's working off of the books that are outside. If we just take the 66 that we have, there's still enough that we can call bullshit on, okay? And if I go back to the story of Noah's flood, let's just make this really simple. Let me ask just a couple of questions. Let's think about all the animals that have to go on the boat. So there's a little over 3 million species that exist today. We know how big the boat was. I don't even care if you want to take the approach and say, oh, speciation could have happened later. Maybe there was like 16,000 or 8,000 species that went onto the boat in the first place. How are 8 people going to take care of 8,000 animals? That's 4,000 pairs, right? How are 8 people going to take care of them? You divide the number of animals by people. It's like, oh, if there's 4,000 pairs, 8,000. So like you've got to take care of 1,000 animals a day? Each person?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you got that.
It's wild.
What about
it's wild to believe.
What about what do the animals eat? Where's all their food going to go? Anteaters eat 30,000 ants and termites per day. I'm sure they got through the first 2 ants on the ark really quickly. Okay? So you need a few million ants just to feed the anteaters. Okay, that's interesting. Let me just ask a question. Because there's a bunch of species that only live on islands that have ocean all around them. How did they get the dragons from Komodo to travel to Turkey to get onto the boat? And then somehow get off the boat, don't have any offspring anywhere else, and go back to Komodo, and that's where we find the dragons today. What about kangaroos? Why aren't there kangaroos in the Middle East? Why are they only in Australia? Like, these are just like common sense things. Like, if all the animals had to go onto a boat, you wouldn't have species, whole families that only exist in a particular area of the world. It's just not plausible. They didn't get on a boat.
Because I agree with you. That's why I think the timeline is very off here. And we are dealing with a myth that was passed on through oral traditions.
Yeah.
And put into a Hebrew Bible.
Yeah.
Look, I can find historical texts or myths from so many other civilizations that also have a great flood story.
Oh,
it tells me at some point there was probably a great flood. But when we know that these are being passed down through oral traditions, you ever had your grandfather tell you a story, an old yarn, where he's telling you something that happened when he was a kid and walked uphill both ways to school? There are exaggerations that happen when you are doing oral tradition and telling stories. So it makes perfect sense in my mind that as time went on and people told others what was happening, things got added in there that were not part of the story, that don't make any sense. And so when I look at the Bible overall, that early history that's in there, how much can you really trust it?
Yeah.
Because these are stories that are being passed down that's not being written down when this stuff actually happened. So I think it's very problematic for us to lean on the Bible or any other myth that's out there as historical text and not think about the fact that, hey, when did written language begin? Okay, that's when people are writing down things that happened. Oh, and by the way, they still write fiction books today. So how do we distinguish the fiction from the nonfiction and what happens? Now, one of the problems as you think about the Bible is, where does Job fit in? Book of Job is smack dab after the book of Proverbs. Like, when did that happen?
Yeah.
I've always thought about Job as, hey, if we can't date stamp and time stamp any of the names that came in Job to what's happening in Genesis, and they're talking about a lot of names, like we should know who these people are.
Yeah.
And then they're talking about dinosaurs living during that time. And it's kind of like, well, when did this happen? I think that it's just something that's interesting that's there in the Bible. And it shows that when men get involved, you're going to deal with a book that's missing half of the story.
Yeah.
Like, we don't even have half of it. And we're trying to piece together our faith on top of this.
Yeah.
And maybe those two should not go side by side, because the stuff that's missing is equally as important as the stuff that's in there, if we're going to look at it as an actual historical text for us to derive our salvation from.
Yeah. I mean, what's the verse where they say not one jot or one tittle is going to be missing from this? Like, here's where you lose me. You say all scripture is given by inspiration of God. By the time I'm reading something, like if I'm gonna take your perspective here, that I agree with, that as stories are passed on, things are going to change, get added, get removed, then how do you know anything is true? Right? And there's problems with a lot of it, but the story of the flood is so easy because, you mentioned there's the Epic of Gilgamesh, which was written around 3500 BC. I had to read it when I was in college. I was studying theology, and it was given to us as a fictional story from Sumeria, but it proves that the flood was true. And like, wait, this was written in 3500 BC. The flood you're telling me about happened in 2500 BC. There's 1,000 years that are missing here. That's interesting. Then you look at how the Bible was actually written, if we're to believe that the historical authors that we're told wrote these books. Genesis through Deuteronomy, supposedly written by Moses. When was Moses alive? Around 1500 BC. So you got 2,500 years from the time the earth supposedly started to Moses, and he's just supposed to write down everything. This is where you run into some crazy stuff in the book of Genesis. Like, the story of Joseph is a crazy one we'll have to get into sometime, because you actually have Joseph get sold multiple times. You got the Ishmaelites, the Midianites happen to be there, and they sell him amongst each other, but then all of a sudden they have him back and they sell him to Potiphar after that. His brothers had nothing to do with it. It's just like, it's totally different from the story that you're taught that his brothers sold him into slavery in Egypt. There were two different groups that came through. It's like, the story makes no sense whatsoever. And you can start to get the sense that, this is a few different oral traditions that they pieced together, and they just kept all of it and tried to make it flow instead of trying to figure out which one was right. That is so much more plausible than trying to make these stories literally work.
Well, you know what's funny to me? For anyone that comes these days who grew up like we did and still doesn't question their faith at all, I just propose a couple questions to them. And one of the ones I love to go to is, okay, hey, you've got the whole Word of God. It starts with in the beginning. Who made the angels? And when did they do it? Because why is there no mention of these beings that are named, that are there to protect us? When were they made?
Yeah.
When were they created? Did they have a whole history before that was happening? But wait, okay, you made the heavens and the earth, and that was the beginning of time. No, there's more to that story. And so it opens up the realm of possibility when you also understand that angels can have sex with human beings and have children. We share the same DNA. And I'm not a scientist, but like I'm not dumb enough to know that like animals and humans doesn't work, but humans and humans does work. Okay, so angels can do it with humans.
Species
either
to be able to have offspring.
I've been saying species. It's either magic, which I don't believe is true, or we do share the same DNA so that we can have sex and we can reproduce and bring forth live young. So angels must be mammals then, if that's the case. Now, if angels are just like human beings, and we don't know about them being recorded in history as having been created by God according to the Bible when humans were created, like, well, what are they? And how do they transport themselves? Like, do they have access to magic? Or do they transport themselves and like their flesh and blood the same as we are? And so I love to think about the possibilities of what could be true. And to explain the world I see around me today with the theories I have from what I get out of old text. So when we talk about these crazy alien sightings that we see, the flying saucers now being corroborated by people in the U.S. military. We've got these great stories that are coming out of like we've got visuals and we can see them, but they're not showing up on the radar.
Yeah.
I wonder, and I say, man, I wonder, like, could that be an angel? Could that be a demon? Hey, what if we get out of the mindset of God being this like this old man holding the lightning bolt up in the clouds, and we say, hey, maybe God that we think of is actually just a flesh and blood human being that created people and put them on this earth and is out there somewhere watching us, and they go to and from in spacecraft and flying saucers. When we see them, it's shocking because it's such a rare thing to see. But as our technology increases, the whole point of it is that we're supposed to go join them where they are. And so every major religion has this whole idea that we are going to have a coming again of the beings that left us, that created our civilization. And I just wonder, when we are seeing these things now, could that just be angels? Could they just be traveling around in spacecraft and we see it and think, hey, did Russia make that?
Yeah.
We don't have the technology for that. But also you think about where our technology came from. And so many civilizations have the same stories of people coming to them and giving them knowledge. Understanding how to do agriculture, how to make war. We have the god of war. Look at the Greeks and the Romans and like all of these things that were taught to mankind. The stories you have would certainly make a lot more sense if it was people from another planet out of the solar system that placed us here. And now you can say, okay, there's the Bible, there's all these other myths that exist about it, but what they're all talking about is this thing that happened probably 20 or 30,000 years ago, or even longer before that, that we colonized this planet. It was put here. Maybe we're here to mine the gold. I don't know what we're here for. I'm just saying that that makes more sense to me than the Bible and the magic and the mysticism of all of this. Like, where did angels and demons come from? That's my only question.
But you're trying so hard to make this fit the biblical narrative, just the stuff that we see around us every single day, and trying so hard to make it fit. It's unlikely that it's going to fit. Yes, for you're looking at the UAPs that we see in the sky, and you're saying, oh, maybe those are angels or how they're transporting themselves. I was just watching Lou Elizondo talking on a podcast, and he was saying one of the reasons why the government is so unwilling to do disclosure, besides the fact that saying UAPs are real, is because they believe that it could cause social unrest. People could lose their religion quickly if it turned out that UFOs, UAPs are actually real, especially if it doesn't fit the biblical narrative. I think it's highly unlikely that the stuff that we're seeing around us that we know is there has anything to do with a random Middle Eastern religion that just happened to perpetuate through time and become one of the global religions. There's so many thousands of religions that predated it that have the same story, same timeline, a whole bunch of stuff. I think they can be separate. They can definitely be separate. But I do reserve a very small place in my mind for the miraculous. I reserve a small place in my mind for the miraculous so that so many of these things can be true. I want it to be true. I just don't think it is.
I just say, I think this is a phrase that's going around right now. Make it make sense. Make it make sense. I'm asking for answers. I'm seeking those answers. But what I'm being shown right now just doesn't make any sense. And again, I just want to be a rational guy.
Yeah.
And be able to understand in a way that I can articulate to my children of this is what I believe and why I believe it. And I know this beyond the shadow of a doubt.
Yeah.
The way they used to say. I can't do it. We got to leave it there. We got to leave it there.
It's been fun.